Okay, good morning, everyone. This is the Redeemed Christian Church of God, Agape House, Nashville, and we want to welcome every one of you to our service this morning. Those in the sanctuary here, and those joining us online. As you know very well, the last Sunday of the month is designated Empowerment Sunday. Empowerment Sunday. This is a program where we discuss issues that will empower us. And in the past, we had discussed issues related to healthcare, to education, to career, relationship, cybersecurity, and so on and so forth. So this is what we do at this time before we go into the service by the next 40 minutes or so. This morning, because this is the Black History Month, we are focusing on a subject related to Black history, the Black experience. And so this morning, subject is the Black experience and American justice system. The Black experience and American justice system. And to help us to understand this subject this morning, we have in our midst our guest, Professor Robert L. Smith. And I will take a little time to introduce him, just a short introduction. Professor Smith is a graduate of Tennessee State University and Howard University School of Law, Washington, D.C., where he obtained the JD. As an attorney, he has practiced law for 48 years, specializing in civil litigation, including housing and employment discrimination, insurance defense, personal injury, real estate matters. He was first licensed in 1977 to practice in the state of Tennessee. He's also admitted to practice before the United States Supreme Court, the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals, the United States District Court for the Middle District of Tennessee, the United States Tax Court, and the state municipal courts of the state of Tennessee. Mr. Smith has served on the federal criminal justice panels where he handled various criminal defense matters. He has been a recipient of awards, including the Nashville Bar Association's of Counsel Award 1989 and the NAACP Coiners Enix Senior Award 1991. In 2008, he was named among the top 100 trial lawyers in Tennessee by the American Trial Lawyers Association. He's a member of the National Bar Association, the Napier Lobby Bar Association, the American Bar Association, and the Nashville Bar Association. Apart from being a legal luminary, Mr. Smith is also a scholar. He's a professor of criminal justice in the Department of Criminal Justice at Tennessee State University, where he teaches criminal and constitutional law courses. Professor Smith is married to Dr. Nita Modest Smith. Professor Smith is the father of Melissa Smith, a graduate of Tennessee State University, and Elizabeth Smith, a graduate of the University of Tennessee, Nashville. Professor Smith, on behalf of Redeemed Christian Church of God, we welcome you here, and we appreciate you for coming to speak to us this morning.
Thank you for inviting me.
As the interviewer of the program, you all know me. I am Dr. Adebayo Yebade, professor of history at Tennessee State University. But here I'm wearing a different hat. I'm sitting here as an assistant pastor in this assembly. Um, so without further ado, I will set the ball rolling. Our discussion will focus on 3 or 4 areas. We'll talk about civil rights. We look at the justice system. We look at law enforcement, and possibly, if we have time, we talk about the issue of American citizenship. Hopefully, we'll have time to do all that. We have just 40 minutes. Now, I want to set the ball rolling here. So we start on civil rights. As we know, during the civil rights movement, African Americans resorted to legal redress, that is, challenging cases in courts, and we've seen a number of court cases won in the history of civil rights movement. President Smith, could you take us through some landmark legal battles, fought by African Americans, their successes and their failures? Most popular, we talk about the Plessy versus Ferguson case of 1895, the Brown case. We know all those. But could you also talk about maybe some of the ones that we don't know, including, the Ferguson case and the Brown case?
Now, this has been a very hard battle legally for African Americans to be able to reach and get the rights that have been afforded to other Americans. And the legal battle has been the arena. I'm going to go through several very quickly. I teach these courses, and so I want at least these cases, about these cases, to the students, but it's important for us to know. I'm going to start off with Plessy versus Ferguson. And this was a case in which an African American was riding in a train car, and as such, the law passed in that state was that, and it was in Louisiana, in that state, that you cannot have black citizens and white citizens in the same train car. Now, Mr. Plessy looked white, and he sat in the white section of the train car. As a consequence, apparently they recognized him in some form or fashion, so he was arrested. The penalty would have been, in terms of a fine, it was $25, which would be roughly almost close to $1,000 today, and then otherwise 20 days also, and/or 20 days in jail. Now, he brought a lawsuit, and under the 14th Amendment, I'm going to just read it for you, at least part of it. The 14th Amendment of the United States Constitution was passed after the Civil War, as a result of the Civil War, which gained the rights of citizenship to all persons who were formerly enslaved, to all black citizens in America. That means we're entitled to the same rights as every other American citizen. And that's what he was saying in his lawsuit. I'm an American citizen. What is this separating me from being able to sit wherever I want to sit? As a consequence, it went all the way to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court ruled that white citizens are not obligated to accept African Americans or black citizens. That's something we'd have to earn, and therefore they came up with the policy of separate but equal. That means, as they interpreted the 14th Amendment, as long as the government provides separate but equal facilities, the constitutional requirement is satisfied. And so what looked like a glaring defeat for black Americans turned out to be, as Christians know, all things work together. That's how we were able to get what we call HBCUs today, historically black colleges and universities. But that was a struggle too. In essence, if you have a college for white citizens and you don't let black citizens in, then you have to set up a college for black citizens under this ruling of the court. It can be segregated, you can have separate and equal, and that's all the schools were functioning. If you're from the South, that's how it worked too, segregated schools. But they weren't equal, though. They got the separate part right, but they never got the equal part right. The other cases, and along that line, we had Berea College versus Kentucky. The Berea College, ever since 1855, when it started, allowed black and white citizens to be educated together. The state of Kentucky made that illegal, and as a consequence, they went to the United States Supreme Court. Supreme Court said separate but equal. So you cannot have black and white citizens being educated together. There was a series of cases, and I'm going to just go through them very quickly, not in detail, but to show you the long struggle to get to the point that we are at this point. The case of Missouri versus Gaines versus Canada. That was a case in which one of the African-American wanted to go to law school. Missouri didn't have a law school for black citizens. So he appealed to the Supreme Court of the United States. Separate but equal. Ever since that Plessy case, you can segregate, but you got to have equals in separate facilities. So they did not have that in Missouri, and therefore he was allowed to go to the University of Missouri Law School. Traditionally, they would send African Americans to another state. The state would, and pay for it if they did not have a school or a degree in their home state. But in this instance, or either they would set up for instance, they would set up a law school. As a matter of fact, Missouri, I think, set up Lincoln University, which is an African-American school, and tried to establish a law school there. But that was not equal. So Supreme Court, in any event, the final analysis was they had to let him into the University of Missouri Law School. Oklahoma had a similar policy, no school for African-Americans. Mr. McLaurin was just trying to get his doctoral degree at the University of Oklahoma. They had no schools, African-American schools, state schools that offered doctoral degrees, so they had to let him in. There was another Sweat versus Painter. He was not denied admission to the University of Texas Law School because he was black, but Texas did not have a law school that black people could go to. They tried to establish Texas Southern Law School, which is a legitimate law school now. But when they tried to establish it in order to get around the law, the court ruled that the University of Texas Law School has 60,000 books, and that Texas Southern, or Texas State as it was called then, only had 6,000 or 10,000 books. So it's not separate and equal, plus the faculty are different. Texas had full-time faculty. Texas State, which they were trying to create for black citizens, only had a visiting professor from the University of Texas, so it was not equal. So they then had to let him into law school, but they did establish the law school, and it's still functioning today. It's Texas Southern University. And that actually, what it led to, NAACP was behind this. NAACP were recruiting people who would test the boundaries of these restrictions, and it led to Brown versus Board. That is the most significant case in terms of this racial disparity in terms of education, and also this separate but equal doctrine. I'm going to share this one because, and this will be the most important one. One of the things, it was Thurgood Marshall, who's a Howard graduate, law graduate, and who was over the legal defense fund for the NAACP, and Dr. Kenneth Clark, who's a psychiatrist, well, we refer to more as a social science expert. And what he did was to demonstrate what's called the, I'm going to give you the correct name of it. It was the white doll test. And this is what he did in order to show the Supreme Court that segregation is causing children, black children, to feel that they are inferior. And to demonstrate this, what he and his wife did, they gathered 3 children ages 3 to 7, and they put out 4 dolls and of different racial persuasions or colors, and including black dolls and white dolls. And they asked the children to pick out the doll that they prefer, and the majority of them picked the white doll. As a matter of fact, if you were from America back in those days, all the black female children had those Shirley Temple dolls, the blonde hair and all that sort of thing. In essence, that was thought to be the preferable way that one should look. And it demonstrated the inferiority complex that children develop in this segregation and the discrimination that goes on in our society. So therefore, the Supreme Court ordered that the schools be desegregated. The case was Brown versus the Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas. There were 7 other states involved in that because it was nationwide. In the South, all the schools were segregated. I went to the segregated school. We got books that were left over from the white schools. We got furniture that was left over. Whenever they got tired of of the furniture or the books that had been outdated, they would always send it to the black schools. And of course, in Nashville, the white students rode school buses, the black students walked. And we walked several miles to school. I know my parents used to always talk about their walking, but literally in modern times we were as well. But those are some of the most important cases, including Loving versus Virginia. So those are the ones.
Yeah, thank you for that historical trajectory. I'm sure we are learning here. We're learning the history of this country. These days, you go to classrooms, we see it anywhere, and we need to appreciate what those before us, what they did. He talked about separate but equal. There was a case that in the 60s where a black student had to attend a white school. They had to place the student desk right outside on the door. They opened the door, and all the whites were sitting in the classroom. Mm-hmm. But his desk was right outside the door because of segregation. So thank you, Professor Smith. You mentioned the Brown case, very, very important. We know that in theory, that court case outlawed segregation in theory, but not so in practice. Because soon after that, there was massive resistance against integration in the South. And we can point to example, look at the Little Rock Central High School in Little Rock, Arkansas, where they refused to integrate. Even here in Nashville, a school was bombed to prevent one black student from enrolling in that school here in Nashville. So my question here is that by the 1960s, the civil rights strategy had shifted from focus on legal redress to direct non-violent acts like the sit-ins, the marches, the freedom ride, and so on. This was the era of King. What can you say about that era in the 60s where King led this strategy? Go and march on the street, we shall overcome, and all those things. Can you just briefly tell us a little bit about that era?
Those movements were very effective. First of all, it not only galvanized African Americans, but white citizens as well, with the obvious injustices and then the also absolute contrary conduct to what the Constitution had promised. Leading in these movements were lawyers, also obviously NAACP, but Howard University would be representing the NAACP. And a lot of lawyers were Howard University graduates, and lawyers throughout the country were litigating that. Now we had as you just mentioned, we had the Little Rock Nine, which were the students who integrated after. Remember that even though they declared in Brown versus Board that separate but equal was unconstitutional, it was not carried out for many, many years before it actually became reality. As a matter of fact, the nonviolent movement emphasized that. And that's when we had the sit-ins, we had the Little Rock Nine that integrated the judge ordered that the schools in Little Rock, Arkansas be integrated. We had the Montgomery bus boycott. We had all of those movements that brought attention to the disparities in this country. So it was effective. We then had the civil rights laws being passed in the 60s, the right to vote, the acts with respect to the right to vote. But then we had the young people, some of the young people. The young people led the nonviolent movement, but they also were involved in the not so nonviolent, the Black Power movement. As a matter of fact, one of the things about the Black Power movement, it perhaps those who didn't like the nonviolent movement, which were those who were opposed to the change in society, they then had to react to the opposing concept, and that was the Black Power movement, which did not advocate being passive. Malcolm X was saying, if someone touches your arm, I'm paraphrasing, then you break it. You don't turn the other cheek. And so you had those kind of conflicts, but it may have forced more emphasis or more appreciation from those who opposed the movement for the nonviolent movement. But what it did do, one other thing that noted with that Black Power movement, suddenly African Americans black citizens in America acknowledged that they were of African descent. That's why we had the afros. That's why all the black kids were wearing dashikis. That's why today we were once called colored. We were once called Negroes. We ran from the term black. But once that Black Power movement came, and we began to throw off anything to the contrary, we became African Americans and acknowledged that we are descended from Africans. And what did it say in the conference report? That we were builders of pyramids. We descended from builders of pyramids, killers of lions. And even though poem said, and not cotton-picking niggas, we acknowledge we are also descended from cotton-picking black citizens. So that movement did bind us to our culture and who we were. So we didn't have to run anymore. We're black and we're African.
Yeah. Thank you so much for looking at that period of civil rights movement. I was going to ask a question about, you talked about this already, the era of Black Power. As you mentioned, the young ones became restless. They couldn't stand all the beatings, the arrests and so on, and they began to advocate open violence. People like Stokely Carmichael, who became Kwame Ture, he said one thing. Let me just paraphrase what he said. He said, no one can give you your freedom. You have to take your freedom yourself. That was, he was saying that, look, we can't just stay where we are being brutalized by the police. We need to return violence for violence. I think you mentioned Malcolm X as well. Malcolm X said that, he said, by any means necessary, including violence. So I know you've talked about that, but let me just ask you a specific question. Now, what strategy do you think actually brought about change? The legal redress, the passive direct action, or violence, or combination of the three?
Well, interestingly enough, I think all of them had their place. Of course, having lived during that time, growing up during that time period, that was, the high school, but, you're able to conceptualize and see what's going on. All of them had their place. You would not want to suggest that violence would have been in the forefront. But the nonviolent movement had its place, and the movement probably stalled a little bit thereafter. And then you had the nonviolent movement, and though we did not advocate that, most African Americans didn't advocate that. The young people, some segments of young people did advocate that. And then you had but there was some sense of pride when African Americans saw groups like the Black Panthers, who were defiant and demanded that, and wanted everybody to know that we're men, and that men will not allow you to continue to abuse African American women, our children, or we're not standing for lynching anymore either. And lynching was like it was a weekend activity. NAACP was founded, and one of the reasons it's founded initially as a Niagara movement, but the NAACP, one of the key components of why they were organizing and fighting and trying to organize against what was called, which was lynching throughout the South. When soldiers came back from World War I, black soldiers, they were being lynched for even having a uniform on. It was called the Red Summer, where throughout the South, black citizens were lynched, assaulted, and all other kinds of mayhem. So that movement did present another image of who and what we were, and what we had to, by the way, they called it the riots, but in Columbia, Tennessee, one soldier came home from the war. He went to the store with his mother. The store clerk or owner disrespected her, and he stood up for her. And then all of a sudden, white citizens have guns marching to the black part of Columbia, Tennessee, and they didn't know that that soldiers just returned from World War I, and they were armed. They're not afraid to shoot, and unfortunately, it was violent. Uh, but there was a defense of what was not only right, but also of their families, et cetera. And we have a lot of that going on in America, the Tulsa rise. But I think altogether, it has forced, up until that point, a recognition and a modification of the atrocities and the disparities in America. So I think they may have all contributed to where we are today.
Yeah, we open this up for discussion, but let me just ask one more question. We are far away from Jim Crow South.
Mm-hmm.
This is 2025, and you can see that we achieved a whole lot. After all, we've had milestone legislations like the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act.
Mm-hmm.
Today, it's almost impossible for any person to win a national election without the black vote. So we've gone far ahead. But can we say, when Obama became president, some people began to talk about post-racial America.
Mm-hmm.
Are we there now? Dream. King had a dream. Have we realized that dream? Can we just rest and say, okay, we are done, no more struggle, it's okay? What do you think?
No. No, absolutely not. One of the things we know throughout history, I'll share this very quickly because it was termed in the 60s. It may have been termed even prior to that, but in the 60s it was very clear. It's called backlash. Every time there's progress made by African Americans, then it is used, then those who are opposed to that, or those who are seeking political power, they then turn it into something that ought not have happened, and as if it was negative, and that then they begin to advocate things to overturn those kind of circumstances. Very quickly, for instance, every time there's an election, in the South, if you grew up in the South, every time there was an election, what would be advocated in order to get elected, we're going to keep those niggas in place. George Washington, I saw this in this documentary, or the movie rather, about George Wallace, who started out, according to the movie, as just one of the regular, human beings in terms of being a politician, etc. But he lost an election, and according to that movie, that his phrase was that he'll never be out-niggered again. In the South, you could win an election just by saying we're going to keep the Negroes in place or keep the niggers in place, that sort of thing. And it's been every election. For instance, when you want, and ever since I've been around, for instance, there was the argument that to get elected in the national presidents of one specific party, they started yelling welfare fraud, just because black citizens now were able to get welfare as other citizens have been able to get, and also to the extent that there are more white citizens on welfare than African Americans. But nonetheless, they use welfare fraud, black woman driving a Cadillac, and all these false, but nonetheless, it gets you elected. Affirmative action was a plan to try to redress all of the disparities over the course of discrimination in terms of jobs. So affirmative action, colleges, rather than being denied, you got a whole state full of black citizens, but you have none of them going to the major universities. Affirmative action. So in political elections, they start talking about and this is for employment too. They have no black people working in various, you got a massive factory with 500 people, you have no African Americans, and also in government. So affirmative action was a way to try to resolve that disparity. But those running for office would start running ads about they are stealing your jobs. And we have inferior people, and all of this is being repeated now, by the way. You have inferior people holding positions by affirmative action, and they're stealing your jobs. And so then, as we know now, affirmative action is essentially gone. That's out. Even we looked at the political climate today. And then one of the ways to get election was black crime. uh, the black people are running drugs. We can't even import grapes. How are we going to be importing drugs from foreign countries? But the emphasis was placed on black crime. And that is another way to get elected. And these are called, this is backlash. It's part of the backlash reaction to progress of African Americans. And it comes up particularly every time there's an election. The other was one more recent. Black people are getting the ability to vote. Took the state of Georgia twice. And now we have, as our voting power became more prevalent, we now have what's called voter fraud. Black people are voting, and now who's committing the real voter fraud? But the emphasis is that black citizens were committing voter fraud. And that's not true. And it's been looked at by authorities. It was not true. But nonetheless, it affected, that's why we have all these bills passed. Not that it was true, but it was a pretext to pass all these bills to restrict voting rights for African Americans. Now, why would you deny people water standing in a line to vote in the sun? Those are the sort of things that are ever ongoing with any progress that African Americans make. The last one about these pretexts. During the election, when it looked like Kamala Harris was winning, and this other presidential candidate, whose name I shall not mention, his whole platform was about immigration, the Mexicans, the Hispanics, immigration. Suddenly now, the same methodology that we've encountered in the South for ages, it suddenly becomes now he starts talking about Haitian immigration. What color are the Haitians? Black. We've always had that burden. If you want to get elected, just start yelling that there's something with black people. There's something that we should suppress. And now the immigration has taken on, that immigration took on a new aura. Not only the Hispanics that he's been yelling about 16 years, we now have black immigrants, and now we got to do something. This has been our fate, but it has not stopped. It has not stopped the effort of African Americans to obtain their rightful place in society.
So I know you're itching to ask questions. So over to the audience. Any question from anyone? I know you have questions. Okay, we have over there.
Hello. Yeah, thank you so much for what you said so far. I have a question about your thoughts on descendants of enslaved Africans having a separate designation, probably for like political or like social benefits. What do you think about that? Do you think that that's for like reparations, for example? Do you think that that's beneficial, or do you think so? Yeah.
Reparations has been argued for years and years and years. What would be right about it? It would be right. But will this society, would American society do so? No, I'm not. I would suggest at this stage that is the least of their consideration. If affirmative action was a way to at least provide some remedies for past discrimination, we were promised 40 acres and a mule. And we're still waiting. And we're not going to get to 40 acres. And right now, we don't want the mule. I don't see America doing that, quite frankly. There's others who do. But I believe there may have been one state, I think California was contemplating it. I'm not sure. But I don't see in the present climate of America that would be something that we should hang our hat on, quite frankly. Others may disagree.
Questions?
Thank you, Professor Smith. I have two questions. I want to first commend you for giving this talk in a calm manner and actually smiling, talking about atrocities. and that happened. I try to avoid these things personally because I don't like very bad news and things that make me upset. But since we're here, so my question is, um, what do you advise? What's your advice to some of us that are learning this thing from like third hand, like grew up in Africa, all our lives lived in Africa, didn't know anything until we came here and we learned all the things that happened. So how do we get involved in a meaningful way, like adults? And number two is, when I read about NAACP, I see all the great things they've done. But going forward, it's like, it's respectfully speaking, it's been a basket of everything. And it's like almost alienating Christians because as a Christian woman, my faith dictates what I do. And you read about these things and you don't even know, have they deviated or there's a big body of Christians that can tap into what they're doing and we're passionate people. But you look at it, it's like it's become a basket of everything. So what do you have to say about it? Thank you.
Well, one of the great movements, the civil rights movement was led by, was a religious entities. They were the ones that were in the forefront, and they were black and white citizens. Now, one of the things that we do know that all citizens, unlike sometimes in our society, they blanket all African Americans with one negative characteristic or so. But that's something we could never fall into. A lot of our movement involved white citizens, and we have Viola Luizzo, who gave up her life, didn't have to do that, from Detroit, driving the civil rights workers in the South for purposes of getting people registered to vote, and was killed. And there have been many other people killed, known and unknown. But one of the things that we can do is that we obviously have to vote. We have to do that. Voting is important. We should join organizations like NAACP. They were in the forefront. They were fighting the battle back in the early 1900s. And so those organizations have been important, and there are other organizations. But our primary source of unity in terms of fighting those things that are adverse to us in American society has been our churches. Those churches united, and they have always been in the forefront of the movement. And that's where we get most of our information. That's where we have the greatest form of unity. And so we have an example of the success that can be had. We saw Atlanta. Atlanta was one of the primary fortresses and bastions for the Confederacy. Whoever thought that black citizens would be the predominant force in Atlanta, Georgia? The segregationists would have had a heart attack if they came back and looked at Atlanta today. So unity, voting, joining organizations that are on the forefront in this movement. The movement is not dead. It just has to modify as those who oppose it modifies. And we'll pull it off. We got that Dr. King statement. I may not get there with you, but we as a people will get to the promised land. And whoever thought we'd have black presidents? And one of them is African descent for real. So,
Yeah.
and a vice president. We have a vice president, and she's from Haiti. Her father's from Haiti. So nothing's impossible with God.
Yeah, I know we have several questions. Professor Chuno has a question, but we have just 1 minute left, so I'm not sure we'll be able to take that question. But guest is still around. He's going to be in the service this morning. So maybe after the service, you can just hijack him at the corridor and ask questions. But before we close, I have one question that I need to ask. And that question is that in this church, we have young ones. We have students, some of them in medical school, reading business, reading, but no law student. So if somebody wants to go into the legal profession as an attorney and as a career professor, what advice would you give the young ones who would like to go into that field?
Growing up,
close with that.
Growing up, it was always the same thing that was told to all African American children. Education is the key. Now, we had two things. Religion, first of all, but education is the other foundation for success and for advancement in our society. And so that has not changed. we fell away from religion, a lot of the African American community. Once we got out of, once the civil rights bills were passed and that sort of thing, we got away from our religion. We were like we came out of Egypt and suddenly started worshiping false gods and gold calves and stuff. But it was always our religious faith. You were required to go to church, and you were required to go to school. Those things have not changed, but you can go as far as you want. Education is available. There's no really excuse compared to our generation, simply because you can go anywhere now. You just have to prepare, and success will be at the end.
Yeah, we're out of time, and so with that, we declare this Empowerment Sunday adjourned until next month. At this time, I just want to thank our guest, Professor Smith, for being with us, for taking us through history, and I believe that we've learned one thing or the other. So thank you so much, and thanks everybody for your contributions.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for having me.